Good afternoon, everybody. So, today I am going to talk about these two measurement techniques, laser Doppler velocimetry and planar laser induced fluorescence for application in combustion systems. I was just looking at this poster where there are very nice colorful pictures of temperature field and probably species field, etc. These are numerical results, okay? And without these instruments there is no way we can validate them. Okay. The numerics can give you lot of information, but many times it can be wrong also, okay, because essentially it depends on how you are modeling the process. So, if you make some wrong assumption, it will give you some results, but that does not mean that is actually representing the natural process. And that is why these techniques which have evolved in last 20-30 years or so have now become the basically the bedrock for combustion research. And now these instruments are so well developed that they can compete very well with numerics. Actually, they are faster than numerics. Typically, I am sure that a numerical simulation will take you a couple of months to converge, but with this instrumentation we can get it done in one day. A lot of case studies can be done. However, they are very, very expensive, and there is a reason for being expensive, because they are very sophisticated and very precise instruments. So, that is why essentially nowadays the experiments and numerics very well complement each other. Earlier, what experiments used to do had very limited information available. So, therefore, experimental data was used only for validation. You create some specific test condition and use numerics the experimental data to validate the numerics, even for a scenario which may not have any correlation with the actual system you are going to study. So, it is a very limited validation, but now with these techniques we can even validate in practical situation, practical scenarios, and that is the advantage of these instruments. So, let me go into the overview of today's presentation. First, that why do we need laser diagnostic in combustion measurements, then we will talk, after that we will go into laser Doppler velocimetry, I will talk about the operating principles and then some applications, particularly in combustion systems. After that, I will go into planar laser induced fluorescence, again operating principle and some applications. Now, why do we need laser diagnostics? If we look at the physics of reacting flow, which I am sure now we are going through a lot of lectures on reacting flow and combustion, it actually is a combination of multiple physical processes. For example, the first one is dispersion and mixing of fuel and air. Typically, all the practical combustion systems, none of them are premixed. They are either at the most can be partially premixed or diffusion flames. We very rarely or perhaps never have a premixed flame. So, therefore, now when it is diffusion flame, the fuel and oxidizer has to come separately, but before they can react they have to be mixed at the molecular level, and that is why the first step here, dispersion and mixing of fuel and air, plays a very important role in the ensuing combustion. For example, this pictures that you are seeing here, it is for a specific distribution. Okay? If that changes, you will not see this picture, it will be some other picture. So, therefore, the species concentration, the final species concentration after the combustion depends on the initial condition, initial dispersion and mixing of fuel air ratio. Similarly, the spatial and temporal distribution of either species or temperature or anything depends on, or the velocity field depends on again the dispersion of and mixing of fuel and air, how these two are mixing with each other. Then the turbulence level and velocity profile, of course, Professor is going to talk a lot about turbulence combustion, and the turbulence level and velocity profile has tremendous impact on the mixing and the ensuing combustion. So, and plus when we are talking about multi-phase reactions, for example, liquid combustion, then atomization, evaporation, mixing, all of them play a very important role in finally what we are the product we are going to get. By product I mean the species concentration and the fields, temperature field, even the pressure. So, therefore, this information, dispersion and mixing of fuel and air is the starting point to do any combustion study. For example, if you are doing say turbulence combustion, you need to know the initial conditions. So, they can be like the initial conditions for ensuing combustion. For premixed flames typically that is not required, but as I said that very rarely a practical flame will be purely premix, at the most it will be partially premix. So, therefore, in that case even these are applicable, but even in premix turbulence level and velocity profile are important. Okay. So, it cannot be taken out. So, this portion here essentially the species concentration, I am talking about the initial distribution of the reactants which will lead to the final concentration. So, I am talking essentially about the initial conditions. Then comes the reaction. So, after the initial conditions are established, then the reaction takes place. Reaction depends again on turbulence level and velocity profile, and that it gives the temperature profile and the emission level. The reaction typically is much faster than this process. The time scale for reaction is much faster than this process. So, therefore, of course, there is a turbulence chemistry interaction, but the reaction time scales are much smaller for most practical systems, particularly for gas turbines. So, therefore, essentially the chemistry can very well be modeled with a single step chemistry, but if you go for a multi-step chemistry you get better accuracy, but it is not that critical. However, this parameter turbulence level and velocity profile is very, very critical, and on top of that what we are getting from the initial state, that will dictate what the final reaction, how the final reaction is going to look like. For example, in a particular location globally you may have, let us say, a rich flame, a lean flame, but in some particular location because of the mixing, so it happens very regularly in engines that locally you may get very, very rich or very, very lean condition. So, there can be the locally it can be beyond the flammability limits, then you will not have the flame in those regions, and that is a local phenomena which is dictated by again this mixing process. So, therefore, the reaction, what the reaction is going to give us depends on what we get from the initial state. So, now in order to understand the complete physics of the reacting flow, we need to understand this entire picture. Similarly, the emission levels, it also depends on the chemistry, it also depends on the fluid mechanics, because emission depends on the fuel air ratio or the local stoichiometry as well as the temperature, and temperature field depends on again all other parameters like the spatial concentration, the turbulence, etc., mixing, etc. So, therefore, all these things are, by the way, it is not that they happen independent to each other, they are all coupled. So, therefore, in order to understand the physics of a particular reacting system, we have to understand all these things in as much detail as possible, and earlier that was not possible with, I will talk about the older measurement techniques, that was not possible to get the detailed measurement of all these parameters. Now, what are the parameters we are talking about? We are talking about velocity field, talking about turbulence level, we are talking about pressure field, we are talking about temperature field, and we are talking about species field plus radical field. So, therefore, all these things taking detailed measurement is very essential and important to understand the physics of the reacting flow. Now, apart from that, the laser diagnostics can provide that, I will come to that later. So, but the conventional methods had many more limitations which were not able to provide detailed measurement. Another application of laser diagnostics is CFD code validation, like I was saying that this CFD results, whether they are actually representing the physical phenomena or not, that can be validated using this laser diagnostic tools. Now, first of all, they provide accurate and detailed measurement of initial and boundary conditions. Now, for CFD you need to know this, you have to specify the initial and boundary conditions. Now, as accurate you are in those, your prediction accuracy will depend on that, and that can be very easily done with the laser diagnostics, and then code validation, some limited results can be compared, experimental data can be compared with the predicted value. So, that can help in code validation. When these two are done, now we have much better understanding of the system. So, the design of more efficient system can be taken up. We can see the dependence of various parameters on the performance of the system. Now, once we see that, then we can suggest changes in the system to make it more efficient. Okay. Similarly, development of new concepts in the laboratory scale, to validate the proof the concept, we can conduct limited experimentation, but of course with much detailed measurement in the laboratory scale for development of new concepts, and then that can again, first we can start from here and then we can go through this entire process again to get the final systems, newer systems. So, therefore, the laser diagnostic tools have brought in a paradigm shift in the way combustion systems are developed. So, let us look at the old measurement techniques. By the way, if I look at this chart, what are the things we need to understand? First of all, the velocity field and the turbulence field, temperature field, then species field. These are the things that we need to measure to understand and measure not only the spatial distribution, temporal distribution as well, that is how it is changing in time and space both. And how were these things measured earlier? For velocity measurement, the conventional methods used may not be in combustion but somewhere else, others say aerodynamics and all, are either pitot tube or hot wire anemometry. Now, pitot tube, essentially you measure the stagnation and static pressure at a particular location, and from there you estimate the dynamic pressure and then get the velocity. First of all, essentially it is not a direct measurement, what you are measuring is the pressure differential. So, it gives the local static pressure and stagnation pressure difference, and from there you calculate back. So, therefore, there is a accuracy of your pressure sensor comes into picture. Secondly, for reacting systems there is a major problem, because this gives you dynamic pressure which is half rho v square, where rho is the density. Now, density, how do you estimate when you have a reacting process? Because you know from equation of state P equal to rho RT, typically these systems are constant pressure systems, most of the gas turbine combustion is a constant pressure processes. So, therefore, rho is inversely proportional to temperature. So, in order to estimate density, there is no way we can directly measure in a gaseous system. So, you need to measure the temperature then, but not only temperature, R is also required, the gas constant, and that depends on the concentration. Okay. So, therefore, you need to measure temperature as well as the concentration to get the velocity measurement. So, that makes it more complex, and secondly it is a point measurement. So, you have to take measurement at various places and then get the entire field. On the other hand, hot wire anemometry just cannot work in a reacting system, because the principle at which a hot wire anemometry works is that you have a very thin wire, you supply a current through this wire to heat it up, okay? And then essentially what it does is that when there is a flow coming in, because of the convection, the flow cools down the wire, and you supply additional current to keep it at a constant temperature, that is a constant temperature anemometer. So, now additional current that you are supplying to keep it constant temperature essentially is proportional to the velocity that you are measuring. So, therefore, high temperature it just cannot, if there is a temperature change in the system, it just cannot react to that. There are few hot wire anemometers with thicker tubes, thicker wires, which can still take measurement in non-reacting hot flows, but the response time is very, very slow. They work more like thermocouples. So, therefore, velocity measurement using conventional hot wire anemometry is just not possible for a reacting system. So, therefore, there is a need to come up with a process to measure the velocity for reacting system, and that is where LDV and PIV, and to certain extent PLIF also, PLIF can also measure velocity field, comes into picture. Then another thing like I mentioned is the temperature measurement. Temperature initially earlier were measured using either suction pyrometer or thermocouple. Both these measurements are essentially intrusive, where you have to put a probe into the system and take the measurement. Now, let us say if I look at this picture, if I stick a probe into this, there is a flow over it. Immediately, because of the presence of this probe, locally the flow field gets changed, because there should be a stagnation point at the surface of the probe, and typically it is subsonic flows. So, the information will propagate upstream. So, you will get so the flow will deviate around that probe, and there is a local change in the pattern. So, when the velocity, essentially the velocity field is changing, and as the velocity field changes, the temperature field is also going to change, because the reaction is changing. So, therefore, when you put a probe into the flow field in a reacting flow, immediately you are bringing in local variation in the flow field, which essentially lead to variation in reaction chemistry and kinetics, as well as the species concentration and temperature. So, therefore, for good quality measurement, the probe methods are not suitable. Another problem earlier, of course, this problem is no longer there, that the thermocouples, these are essentially the time response is very slow, unless you go for very fine miniature thermocouples which act as a much faster rate. Typically the time response is very slow. So these two coupled together, the temperature measurement also still conventionally we use thermocouple for rough measurement, but if you have to get very good quality measurement, it is better to switch over to the other techniques. One of them is LIF, then there are other like Rayleigh thermometry, then there are IR thermometry, which techniques are non-intrusive optical techniques which can measure temperature without putting any probe into the flow field. Then another measurement, another important parameter particularly for liquids combustion as a size measurement, which is the measurement of droplet size. This is earlier was done using microscopy or sieving or holography or light scattering, but nowadays we usually use either Mean scattering based Melbourne particle sizer or the PDPA, which Dr. Agarwal is going to talk about tomorrow. And then the species concentration measurement. Earlier this was done using suction probes. You take sample out from the combustion volume, small amount of samples, and then you do a gas chromatography of the samples to find out what is the concentration or the distribution of species in that. Once again, that is an intrusive technique. So once you are putting the suction probe locally, you are creating a partial vacuum, the flow field changes, and it is not an in situ measurement. The processing has to be done outside the system. So therefore what you are measuring is actually first of all physically not representing the actual system, and secondly it is not the instantaneous measurement. So the temporal resolution is not there. So these were the old techniques, and the laser based instrumentation kind of address these issues. So these are the laser based measurements which are typically used. Laser Doppler velocimetry, this I am going to talk about a little more detail, which is LDV. Phase Doppler particle analyzer, this Dr. Agarwal is going to talk about tomorrow. Then laser induced fluorescence, so this is for the velocity measurement, this is for droplet size measurement, this is LIF I am going to talk about today, is essentially for temperature and species field measurement. Laser induced incandescence, this is for the measurement of soot concentration and number density. Then particle image velocimetry is for measurement of velocity field. Then May and Rayleigh scattering for measurement of size as well as for the measurement of temperature. Spontaneous Raman scattering for measurement of species concentration, and emission and absorption spectroscopy again for species field. So out of this, these are typically laser based instruments, laser and optical instruments, not only laser based. I am going to talk about these two, laser Doppler velocimetry and laser induced fluorescence. So let us come to now the first instrument I am going to talk about, which is the laser Doppler velocimetry. First of all, why do we need this? Almost all industrial and practical flows are turbulent flows, and turbulent flows are inherently 3D, vertical and diffusive, and the full governing equation, Navier-Stokes equations, are almost impossible to solve for a practical system with a limited time period. It depends on your computation capability. It's like I was mentioning, typically a particular problem will take couple of months to get a solution with even with a limited scope, because typically the grid size is cubed of the Reynolds number. So if you go to a practical system, turbulent Reynolds number is fairly high, then your number of grid size increases by cube of that. So therefore the computational time keeps on increasing as we go to more and more practical system. So therefore it becomes almost impossible to solve a practical system with the required desired accuracy, and the measurements on the other hand are easier if they are done correctly. Okay. So therefore there is a need to perform the velocity measurement with accuracy, and like I mentioned, without having to put a probe in the flow field, because if I put a probe in the flow field, immediately the flow field is going to change. So therefore we need to have a technique to measure the velocity field or the variation of velocity with time at a particular point with better accuracy, and particularly in order to, by the way, another problem is that if you look at practical industrial problems, the turbulence levels are fairly high. It is not only they are turbulent, typically turbulence level will be more than 50, 60, not 50, 15 to 20% typically is the range. So they are fairly high level of turbulence, and again in order to measure those, the pitot is highly inadequate, because pitot will not have that type of response. So therefore hot wire can do that type of resolve that type of turbulence, but like I mentioned in reacting throws, hot wire is not adequate. So, therefore, you have to have a system which can resolve this type of turbulent intensity as well, and that is where LDV is a very handy tool. So, the advantages of LDV, first of all, it measures the velocity in either liquid or gas. Both the velocity for both the phases can be measured. Up to all three velocity components can be measured simultaneously, and it is a non-intrusive measurement because it is optical technique. It is an absolute measurement technique. This is a very important thing about LDV. You do not require any calibration of the system, because the measurement principle is based on solid optical physics. It does not require any calibration. So, directly you can measure the velocity, and that is something that among all the measurement techniques, otherwise either you are talking about pitot or hot wire. Pitot you have to calibrate the pressure sensor, in hot wire you have to calibrate, essentially you get a signal in terms of current or voltage, and then you have to convert it back to the physical property, whereas this is a direct measurement. And another advantage is that it is very, very accurate, and the accuracy depends on the speed of the electronics. So, it is not limited by the physical system, but the electronics. So, nowadays with improved electronics we can get very good bandwidth and accuracy, and it has very good, very high spatial resolution, because the measurement volume is very small. The disadvantage is, first of all, it requires tracer particles. So, small particles are required to essentially seed the flow field, and it actually takes measurement of those particles, because here particles are needed. However, if you are talking about two phase process like a spray in air, then the liquid particles serve as the tracer particle. Another disadvantage is a point measurement, it is not a field measurement. So, you have to take measurement at various points to get the field. Now, let us see how it works. The optical principle is very, very simple. What we have is, let us say this is a particle, it is moving like this, okay? The particle is moving like this. Two laser beams are made to pass and intersect at a particular point. So, these are such say two laser beams, they are intersecting at a particular point, and when the beams intersect, because of this intersection they create an interference pattern. So, there will be dark and light bands because of this interference. Now, when the particle moves through this dark and light bands, the particle is going to reflect the light beam. So, when it is dark and there is a photo detector which is put at certain location. So, when it is passing through the dark patch, the detector does not record anything because there is no light coming, but when it is passing through the bright spot, the light is reflected to the detector. So, detector basically detects a light pulse. So, now if you plot the trace of this light that the detector is receiving, it will follow a pattern, sinusoidal pattern. So, it will have a frequency or wavelength, and the wavelength of that can be converted to velocity. Let me tell you how. So, this is the fringe that is created of the two laser beams, and the interference of two laser beams creating this fringe. So, you can see there is a dark band and light band, and the separation of this fringe is again depending on optics, has a specific expression. This is the delta f is the fringe separation. It depends on lambda, where lambda is the wavelength of this laser beams, by 2 sin theta by 2, where theta is the angle it makes, the two beams make with each other. So, 2 sin theta by 2, theta is this angle, so half of this. So, this is the expression for the fringe spacing. So, we know how far apart these fringes are by just knowing the wavelength, which is a known laser wavelength, and the angle that they are making, and the angle depends on the focal length of the beam, that the optics that we are using. So, this focal laser beams intersect and form the measurement volume, and the plane wave fronts, essentially we have beam west is in the plane of intersection. So, you see that this is a very enlarged image. What you see here, these are very thin light beams, they will be less than 1 mm, okay? So, half an mm or something. So, you can understand that this portion is very, very small, it is like a thin vest, and that is the measurement volume. So, you can see that the spatial accuracy, you are measuring the value here within this, right. So, it is a very fine very precisely you can find a point where you are taking the measurement, because the beams are crossing and there is a very small beam and the crossing west is very, very small. So, the spatial resolution, like I mentioned in the previous slide, is very, very good. Now, this is the interference in the plane of intersection, and like I see here, the bright and dark patches is the interference pattern. Now, this is what it happens. So, the photodetector, when the particle crosses this, as I mentioned, there will be bright and dark. So, if a photodetector is measuring that, if I plot the intensity, you see intensity is almost 0 to high, 0 to high. So, you get a pattern like this. So, almost 0 intensity to high intensity. Now, this is the wave pattern that we are getting, this is the wave pattern. The distance or rather in this wave, from this point to this point, the space that is covered essentially is nothing but the beam spacing, right, because this is the beam spacing. So, the spacing between these two. So, during this location it is at bright, from here is bright, again is becoming bright here, and here is dark. So, when it is here we get the peak, again it has come here to get the peak. So, therefore, the particle has traversed this distance going from one bright peak to another bright peak. So, this is the bright peak to another bright peak. So, this S is essentially delta f, which is the distance between the two fringes. Now, if the particle is moving with a velocity v and it has travelled a distance s, so therefore, the time it takes to travel from here to here is essentially the inverse of this frequency, right. Therefore, this frequency of this signal is essentially nothing but v by s, where v is the velocity and s is the spacing. So, therefore, the frequency is given by 2 v sin theta by 2 by lambda, and this frequency can be measured, because we are measuring this signal. We can analyze this signal, we can pass it through a spectrometer and a spectrum analyzer, and the spectrum analyzer can give the frequency of this signal. So, this frequency can be directly measured. If you measure this frequency, now look at this expression, theta is known, lambda is known, only unknown is v. So, you can by measuring the frequency you can directly measure the velocity. So, velocity of that particle which has crossed this measurement volume can be directly measured. So, that is why first of all why we need the tracer particles. So, if we use a pure phase, we have to seed the flow with some particles to essentially represent the velocity, and if it is a two phase system like a spray, then the spray droplets essentially percuss the particle. So, that is how it works. It is a very simple concept and it can directly give the velocity. Now, if there are fluctuations, now one point to another, one droplet to another droplet again, or one particle to another particle, there may be variation because of the local turbulence. So, that can also be measured, because this will be giving the velocity for a particular particle, then another particle coming with a different velocity, that can also be measured. So, this is the measurement principle then, very simple. Velocity is equal to distance by time. Distance is the fringe spacing and time is the time it takes to go from here to here. Okay. So, this is the signal versus time, this is measured, this d is known, this is the flow with particle, d is the fringe spacing which is known. This is the system. We have two laser beams focusing at this point. This is shown with the back scattered mode. So, the light is scattered by these particles here and it is received here in this detector and then sent to the processor for processing. There is another component called Bragg cell, I will come to what is Bragg cell little later. This is the measurement volume. So, this is the signal we get, and from this signal we can get the velocity. Okay. So, this is the system configuration then for an LDV system. What we have is a laser. The laser can be helium neon laser, an argon ion laser, a ND arc laser, a diode laser, any kind of laser can do the work. Transmitting, earlier the big LDV systems used to use either earlier was Henin laser, then argon ion. Now again we have gone back to diode lasers because they are cheap and easy to assemble. So, now most of the newer systems are coming with diode lasers. Then a transmitting optics. Now, transmitting optics is essentially to take the laser beam to the measurement domain. So, first of all the laser here sends a single beam, but we need two beams. So, there is a beam splitter. Beam splitter splits the beam into two, then one of them is shifted, one of the beam is shifted, I will talk about it a little later, by a particular frequency, So, we have two beams with slightly different frequency with each other and then an anachromatic lens to focus this to this point. Now, here is the actually your measurement volume is a gas, liquid or particle. After, so here is the light gets reflected and this is the receiving optics. So, this is the receiving optic essentially is a lens again to get the light in. Then we have some special filter, then photomultiplier and photodiode for measuring the intensity of the light that is going through. Now, this measured light is passed through a signal conditioner. It essentially puts a preamplifier and a filter to remove the noise as much as possible, and after the noise is removed it goes for signal processing essentially to estimate the frequency. So, the signal processing is either it can be either a spectrum analyzer or a simple correlator or a counter or tracker, but it just gives the frequency and then after that it goes into the computer for storage. So, this is the complete system configuration which is not very difficult. The most critical component here is the signal processing part, because the frequencies are fairly high, as because I will show the typically what will be the frequency, it will be some megahertz to gigahertz range, because of the fact that if you look at this expression, this lambda is the wavelength of the laser light and that is say typically in some nanometer, right. So, it is inverse of that. So, therefore, this becomes very high, the frequencies are very, very high. So, because you have to measure those high frequencies you require very fast electronics and that is what makes the system more expensive, and this is essentially the critical component. Now, first let us look at the laser. So, laser we will talk about the characteristics and requirement. So, first of all why do we need use laser? Because it is monochromatic, because we need to know this lambda which is one of the parameter coming as the beam spacing. So, if we do not have a single value of lambda then we cannot get the direct measurement of velocity, and that is why we need laser, because it is a monochromatic light, it gives a single value of lambda. Then it has to be coherent so that the dispersion is less, then it should be linearly polarized and should have low divergence. So, typically a collimator is used to reduce the divergence. So, this can be taken care of by the optics. Now, typically the laser has a Gaussian intensity distribution where the maximum intensity is at the center and is false at the edges. So, this is typically a distribution, therefore, the calculations are actually made based on this intensity. Now, this is the transmitting optics. The laser beam is coming as a single beam. So, basic modules of the transmitting optics first of all is a beam splitter, BS is the beam splitter, which is nothing but two prisms attached to each other. So, the laser coming here at the interface it gets split into two beams, one goes straight, there are some mirrors to essentially turn it here and there and taking to this focusing lens. Another arm of the laser beam, another beam is taken through a component called Bragg cell and then it is passed through the lens. So, what is the Bragg cell does? It essentially shifts the frequency of this laser beam by a fixed amount. What is the importance of shifting this? Because of this it can measure the flow velocities as well as the flow direction, because so far we are just talking about a droplet going through the fringe pattern. So, it does not matter whether it is going from top or from the bottom, it will give the same signal. So, you will not be able to distinguish between the flow going up or flow going down, and with this frequency shift as I will discuss we can identify the direction of the flow. So, this is typically what is the optics is. So, these are the two laser beams and then they are focused here at certain point theta. So, this theta is what goes into our calculation. So, this can again by knowing the focal is essentially we know the focal length of this and we know this displacement, we can directly estimate what is theta. So, actually what happens is that when we set it up for measurement, this focal length and this displacement of the two laser beams are known and this focal length are known. Similarly, this focal length is known. So, from there we do not have to actually give a value of theta, the system calculates and takes the value of theta. at the beam divergence angle. Now, this is the beam expander which essentially makes the this angle. So, it reduce, if let us see what we are looking here, if the beams were coming straight from here and then focused, your value of theta will be less, but then the measurement volume also will be much larger, because you have a shallow interference. So, by expanding the beam, by sending it out, we are actually going for much sharper focus and a much smaller measurement volume. So, that is one of the advantages, and it increases the power density also. So, because of that the beam is expanded little bit, and these parameters are known. So, we can easily correct for the beam expansion. Now, coming to this frequency shift, as I mentioned here, using this Bragg cell we are introducing a shift in the frequency. Now, let us understand what it is doing. If I look at this fringe pattern, whether we are coming from this side or this side, the signal is going to be same. Okay. But if one of the beam is shifted by a certain frequency, let us say given by this shift f shift. Okay. First of all, if you look back at the expression that we had for frequency versus velocity, there is a linear relationship. Okay. So, this is the say no shift, this is the no shift case, it is going from here to here, linear relationship. So, we are measuring the frequency, we are getting the velocity, and my system has a particular limit, the minimum frequency it can measure, the maximum frequency it can measure. So, therefore, that is the limit of the velocity that is given here. Now, if we are shifting the frequency, then the fringe pattern will seem to be moving in the direction of the shifted beam. Okay. Because the fringe is no longer the interference pattern is no longer like a stationary, because one of the beam is shifted, the fringe pattern starts to move. So, now this blue one is the shifted picture, this is a shifted picture. So, you can see now this was the f mean here, now that has shifted to, so minimum frequency we can measure is still this, but now at the same frequency we are measuring a lower velocity, right. So, you are measuring a lower velocity here, of course, the max has also shifted, and now since the pattern is moving in a direction, so the field pattern is moving in a direction and velocity is coming in a direction, there is a Doppler effect. So, there is a Doppler shift introduced which essentially gives us the direction. So, with frequency shift one beam relative to other, it appears to move at the shift frequency, and that can identify the negative velocity as well, because it is moving in a particular direction. It can measure depending on the direction, there will be a Doppler shift added, and because of that we can get now the negative velocity as well. So, that is why this Bragg cell which introduces a frequency shift in the measurement helps in measuring the negative velocity or giving the direction, as well as it can reduce the lower velocity limit. So, how does it work? This is the Bragg cell. The laser, essentially what it is, nothing but an acousto-optical modulator. We have a piezoelectric driver, on top of that there is a mirror which is essentially put here, a mirror is essentially glued to that driver. When the laser beam comes here and then using this piezoelectric driver, the mirror is given a motion typically about 40 hertz, 40 megahertz. So, when it comes here, this is the laser, you see that this is the wave front, unshifted beam goes straight, and because of this motion and the reflection there is a shifted beam at a shifted frequency, right. So, now these two laser beams are then again taken together through the beam splitter. So, you have a shifted frequency obtained here, FL plus Fs. So, by giving this motion we shift the frequency of the one of the beams. So, this is again this is one of the systems which essentially allows us to distinguish between the negative and positive velocity, and after that by using additional prism we can do the correction, we can steer the beams, prisms and lenses, we can take it back. So, this is what the Bragg cell is, and now let us go to the measurement volume. So, this is the measurement volume. Now, we are going towards a transmitting system. We have talked about the final component of the transmitting system. So, this is the measurement volume. The transmitting system or the transiting lens generates the measurement volume. So, this is where the beams are crossing, this angle is known, the focal length is known, this is where the fringe pattern is created, and this is how it looks like. Now, as the laser has a Gaussian distribution, at this plane we have the maximum intensity. So, the plane of the fringe gets the maximum intensity because of the laser, and because of that it gets much sharper signal. So, the measurement volume has a Gaussian intensity distribution in all 3 dimensions, it is not only in one dimension, and its typical shape is ellipsoid as is shown here. Now, coming to the, so this is the transmitting optics, which is sending the laser beam to the measurement volume, then a droplet or particle passes through this measurement volume, the light gets scattered. Now, we need to measure this scattered light, that is the receiving system, this is the receiving optics. So, this is the measurement volume, light gets scattered, it goes through some lenses, then these are focused using a lens to the tip of a fiber optic cable, and then it goes through the multifiber to the photomultiplier tube. Photomultiplier measures the voltage. So, there are again we also put an interference filter, so that the background light is eliminated, because we know the laser frequency. So, we put a filter of that same frequency, then only the laser light goes through, then we can take measurement in bright daylight as well without affecting the measurement. So, this is the receiving optics, it has receiving lens, then fiber optic and interference filter, and the detector can be either photomultiplier or photodiode, because it just have to give the voltage output. Now, the signal characteristic typically looks like this, and the data can be very noisy because of the high frequency that we are talking about, and the data magnitude is also very low. So, there can be multiple sources of noise, first is photo detection short noise, then secondary electronic noise, then higher order laser modes, then light scatter from outside the measurement volume, that may also be present, and dirt etc., and unwanted reflections from windows, lenses, mirrors etc. So, essentially we would like to have as high signal to noise ratio as possible, and that can be done by selecting laser power, seeding, optical parameter etc. So, these are actually the parameters that are set in the software to maximize the signal to noise ratio. Once we have a good signal to noise ratio, then the data is much more reliable. Now, signal conditioning, as I mentioned, is another very important component, which consists of amplifiers and filters. So, the voltage data that is coming from the photomultiplier, that will also have some noise. So, as I mentioned here, there is a lot of noise here. So, this amplifier and filter are essentially used to remove those noise, so that we get good signal to noise ratio. So, we first amplify the signal, so most of the noisy signal goes away in the amplifying and filtering process. After that comes the signal processing. So, here essentially the main aim is to get the frequency of this signal, and then the frequency can be correlated to the velocity. So, we can have a frequency tracker or frequency counter or spectrum analyzer, all of them essentially gives the frequency of the signal. Once you have frequency, straight away we can get the velocity data. So, typically the systems has to be megahertz to gigahertz range response times. So, that is why this is very expensive, because this electronics is very expensive. Now, another important aspect of measuring using LDV is the particle seeding. As I said, the seeding particles are required. Now, your measurement depends on the size of the seeding particle you are using as well. It is not that straightforward. Here I have shown 3 different size particles. One is particle with a size of 0.2 lambda. This is of the order of lambda, it is 10 lambda, where lambda is the frequency of the wavelength of the light, laser light that we are looking at. So, this is a very small size, this is moderate size. Now, let us look at this one. The particle is coming here, the light is coming here. If I look at the scatter pattern of the light, it is uniformly distributed everywhere without any directional preference. So, because of that, it is almost if these are the polar plots, we see that there is not distinguishable which direction it is coming. On the other hand, when we go to the 1 lambda, there is some directionality, but on this side in the backscatter mode there is not much of directionality. But when we are 10 lambda, we see at 0 in this portion we have maximum signal intensity. So, if I take the droplets the particle size of that range and have my sensor here in the backscatter mode, we get maximum intensity of the signal, and if it is slightly misaligned, the signal will go away completely. So, we know the direction where we are putting our sensor very well, but here or here, even if I am here, we get almost same signal. So, therefore, I do not know with respect to the system what is my orientation, because even if I make a mistake it is not easily identifiable, but here it is clearly identifiable. So, therefore, this size of 10 lambda is the optimum size. You should not be having very small size or a moderate size, because then there is a possibility of misalignment and getting wrong data. Okay. Now, there are different configurations of LDV system. We can have forward scatter and side scatter is typically off axis. This is here the transmitting lens. We can have the receiving optics either here or here, this forward and side scatter, which are difficult to align and they are vibration sensitive, or we can have back scatter, which is 0 degree. So, this is the back scatter mode. This is easy to align and user friendly. Typically, when we are using LDV system only, then this is the preferred mode, but typically LDV is also used with PDPA, and PDPA will operate in the side scatter mode at 30 degree. In that case, it is advisable to go for a side scatter and forward scatter, because we cannot have otherwise you need to have additional receivers. So, typically we are using with PDPA, we have at least one of the channels in this direction. Also, many times, and back scatter, the advantage is you can have a single window, and from single window practical system we can have a single window and we can get the measurement, but in this mode we need to have multiple windows and side windows. That is what makes it more expensive. So, depending of course on the system we choose, but if you are doing measurements in open, then we can go for this. Now, let us look at some of the applications of LDV. First, it can be used for laminar and turbulent flows, both flows can be identified very well. Investigations on aerodynamics, we can look at the boundary layer, we can look at the basically the surface flow distribution, then up to supersonic flows it can very easily accommodate, it can go to very high speed flows. It can be used for turbines, automotives, any turbo machinery, any rotating flow system, anything. Then it can be used for liquid flows. It can also be used for surface velocity and vibration measurements, that is one of the applications of LDV. It can be used in hot environments like flames and plasma, etc. One more point I would like to mention here, that when we use these things for flames, the seeding particle typically when it is in gaseous phase or liquid phase, particularly in gaseous phase we use liquid particles, very small droplets, but when we are using in hot flames typically we use solid particles. Now, the solid particles also we have to choose particles which are not reacting. So, either titanium oxide or silicon oxide particles are used. So, those particles of course, even if I look at 10 lambda, the size is, because 1 lambda is about 10 to the power minus 9, right. So, it is a very small nano size particle. So, 10 lambda is also very small nano size particle. So, therefore, those small particles, essentially the idea is we choose those small particles because we inherently assume that if the particles are small, then they have reached the critical stage, they will flow with the flow field. If the particles are big, then there will be aerodynamic drag and other things acting on them, and they can accelerate or decelerate. But if their particle is small, they will flow with the field, and that is why we choose small particles. So, here in the reacting environment, this should be basically solid particles. In gas, we also use oil particles, but that cannot be used for reacting conditions. But as you can look at the equations, temperature is nowhere appearing. Okay. So, if in a high temperature field, pressure is nowhere appearing. So, high pressure field also this can be very easily used. So, velocity of particles can be measured. There are many other applications. Now, I will talk about some applications of LDV in combustion systems. They are used extensively for cold flow characterization in model combustors to get the flow field of the combustors. In the next class, I will talk about the combustion in gas turbines, where you will see the importance of the flow field. So, here in 1983, Young and Yu actually did a detailed study of flow characterization in a dumb combustor, then reacting and non-reacting flow in Swirl stabilized combustor with high turbulence intensity, then influence of heat release on turbulence structure of jet flows, study of burning spray flames, etc. So, here are some of the results. You can see this is a dumb combustor. The detailed flow field is measured using an LDV. So, you can see there are some structures, specific structures are created and later on you will see that the flame also actually sits on those. So, I actually have a PLIF image, it shows the flame sits on those. So, the low velocity regions that are created here, that is where the flame will have the stagnation power or more stability. So, the flame will sit in that. So, looking at the, because here you will have a rest strain rate, but when you go to high velocity region, strain rate will be so much that the flame cannot stabilize there. So, the velocity field tells us where the flame is more likely to be. Similarly, velocity field will tell us how the mixing is going to occur. So, that will also tell in a diffusion flame where the flame is going to be. So, in this study, detailed profile of mean velocity, turbulent intensity and turbulent shear stresses were measured, and it also helped in determining the dividing streamlines and the reattachment point, because from the dump plane the flow gets separated and then reattaches itself inside the combustor, and the maximum kinetic energy essentially was seen to be along the dividing streamline. So, there is a strong production of turbulence energy in this system, and there are high velocity gradients in recirculation zone and inlet zone, which essentially favors rapid mixing. So, the zones where we have maximum mixing, where we have turbulence in generation, everything is identified just by the LDV measurement to get the getting the velocity field. Then this another one is the reacting and non reactive flow in sieve stabilized combustors. Again, these are the velocity fields that you can see generated. Here we have a reacting the recirculating bubble or a persisting vortex because of swirling flow, and then beyond this point we get uniform velocity developing. So, reaction enhances the strength of recirculating flow, and that was essentially by the measurement of velocity it was identified, and there is small change in inlet condition which can drastically affect the flow structure. So, once again the LDV measurement gave the flow structure which and the effect of inlet condition as well as the reaction is identified on the flow structure from the LDV measurements. Then this is the jet flows, structure of jet flows. Here you can see the various profiles of the jet flow at various locations, the velocity measurement is at the x and y turbulence kinetic energy measurements, the x and y RMS velocity measurements shown here. So, you can see that various locations we have velocity profile appearing differently. So, the near exit region of non-combusting jet, typically the fluctuation in u velocity component is much more than in the v velocity component, but for reacting jet this to become almost same, and at the exit there is no appreciable change in radial distribution between either hot flow and cold flow. So, essentially once the reaction, if you go far off, then all the effect of reaction essentially dies out and they show a very similar parameter as behavior. Similarly, what is seen here from this is the K, we get at the center of the jet flame we get fairly low turbulence intensity or turbulence kinetic energy, that is at the center we have almost laminar flame. Now, one question that arises always, that since all the practical systems are turbulent flames, why do you even study laminar flames? Because in this is a practical flame, jet flow. Here what is shown here is that towards the center actually we get laminar flames. So, therefore, if we study it using turbulence we will not get the actual features, but laminar flame features can be very easily seen here. And another thing that is shown from this measurement is that we get maximum kinetic energy at central region of the cold flow. The disadvantages of LDV system, as I mentioned earlier, is the point measurement. Errors are very difficult to quantify. If there are any error, you cannot distinguish it. It is all embedded in the measurement itself, and the cost is very, very high, because there is cost of the laser and there is a cost of the electronics and cost of the optics, because this optics also is very, very expensive. You cannot, the optics has to be the maximum possible quality. All the surfaces should be as smooth as possible, and because of that typically the LDV system is very, very expensive. A single component system cost about $138,000, $140,000, and when you add more components the cost goes up. And however, the advantages are much more and the advantages outweigh the disadvantages. So, now typically both LDV as well as PIV are more extensively used, and actually the situation is such that now if you want to publish any experimental paper you have to use any one of them. Nobody is going to accept if you do anything with hot wire or pitot. Okay. So, with this the part of the LDV ends. If you can align it properly and set the parameters properly, you can go to 80-90%. yeah, 80-90% you can go. Typically, if you are doing the measurement in atmosphere, 90% easily you can achieve, but when you do inside a system, there is so much scattering from the windows and all, that is what makes it more difficult. And if you are not very close to the tip of the spray, if you are down somewhere say 6-7 inches, fairly dilute spray, you can get very good accuracy. No, fuels and water, the only effect is that when you are doing fuel, typically you do not do it in atmosphere, you will do it in a chamber. And when you are doing in chamber, the laser beam, when it is crossing the windows, it bends. Now, when it is coming back, it may not come to the center. So, the alignment becomes more difficult and then the rejection rate also becomes low. And second thing, what happens if you are doing a chamber, after you start, immediately okay. So, you have to use a flat window. So, those are the issues that you have to take care of. Otherwise, fuel type, because you are essentially you have to set the refractive index. Once you set the refractive index, the fuel type should have any effect. But diesel sprays typically are much more dense, that is why data is rejected, multiple drops going through together. Yeah. No, here you get the velocity at a particular point. Temporal averaging. This is an optical diagnostic technique widely used for flow visualization and quantitative measurements. Typically, this is used for measurement of concentration and temperature measurements. So, this is very widely used for flame diagnostics. Now, the content of this part of the talk, first is excuse me, why do we need PLIF, then how does it work, some applications of PLIF, and then advantages and limitations of PLIF systems. So, laser based flame diagnostics is now, as I have mentioned, that is becoming more and more very important tool for combustion research. Here I have some pictures, these are taken from LaVision site. This is a laser is used to excite certain regions of the flame and some information is obtained from that. So, the realization of proper combustion system requires this detailed understanding of complex gas dynamics process, which is the reaction as well as the fluid mechanics of it. And in order to do this, the laser based flame diagnostic tools are becoming a critical part of it. So, the laser imaging techniques typically which are used are laser induced fluorescence, which is I am going to talk about, then laser induced incandescence, which is at a much higher, essentially in laser induced incandescent, the laser typically is an IR laser which sends which heats up soot particles to a very high temperature, and then the incandescence is measured to estimate the soot particle size and the soot concentration. So, LII is used for measurement of soot. Then particle image velocimetry, which Dr. Agarwal is going to talk about tomorrow, where we send two laser sheet slightly delayed with respect to each other, very close to each other, and then take the images. So, essentially from these two images, and there are also seeding particles are there by the tracer particles, then doing a correlation you can find out the velocity field. Then Mie and Rayleigh scattering are essentially used for thermography or temperature measurement. Rayleigh scattering is used and Mie scattering is used for size measurement. Essentially the light, laser light is scattered and the scattering is measured. Then spontaneous Raman scattering is used essentially for the species measurement, and emission and absorption spectroscopy, which is, so this is essentially LII picture, this is a spectroscopy picture, and this is the laser based instrumentation. So, with these instruments essentially multi-parameter measurements with high spatial and temporal resolution in combustion systems are possible. So, all these instruments together, if they are all used together, we can get the full understanding of what is happening in a combustion system. And of course, it is not possible to use all of them together, but there are some instruments. One instrument is out of them is the laser induced fluorescence, which can take multiple measurements simultaneously. For example, what are we looking at in this? We are looking at the temperature field, we are looking at the spatial field, we are looking at species field and the velocity field primarily, and of course soot is another thing that we look at. Now these three can be measured with LIF. Another thing that is advantage with LIF is, since it operates with a specific principle, it does not interfere with another measurements. So for example, LII or PIV or even RS or any other can be simultaneously done with LIF, okay, because these are all different principle and the laser frequencies can be different. So a PIV laser does not have enough power to excite fluorescence. Okay. On the other hand, LII is too powerful, so it is way beyond the power that is required. So therefore that does not interfere with this measurement, and that is the advantage, that LIF can be done with other measurements as well. However, this Raman scattering and Rayleigh scattering we have to be careful about when we are doing fluorescence, because these frequencies are very similar, so it is very difficult to distinguish between this phenomena. It is also similar to a spectroscopic method only. Now let us coming to different measurements. There is a chart of different measurement. Multi-phase flow field, that is the velocity field if you want to measure, typically what is used is PIV. For mixture preparation, that is the mixing of fuel and air, we use either fuel or tracer PLIF. Okay, this is the measurement that is used, that we are going to talk about. So therefore you see that PLIF is used for the mixing purpose, studying the mixing, and we can also use absorption or path IR absorption to study the mixing. Particularly, essentially if you are looking at the IR signature outside, it is dependent on the mixing of the plume and the ambient. So that is studied by the IR absorption spectroscopy. Then the flame radicals, it is predominantly PLIF. You can look at OH, CH, NO, HCHO, etc., various other particles, or flame emission spectroscopy. Emission spectroscopy has its own limitation, I will talk about that, like chemiluminescence. So I will talk about the comparison between these two. Why? Because this is essentially, PLIF is much better accuracy, particularly in the terms of temporal, and also is a field measurement. Then flame temperature, we can have Rayleigh spectroscopy, we can have Raman spectroscopy and PLIF. We can also have IR thermography, IR absorption. Now here IR thermography and IR absorption for the flame temperature measurement has their own limitation, because primarily in the flames maximum IR is produced by CO2. If you are looking at hydrogen oxygen flame, then CO2 is not present. So your IR signature can be very misleading, unless you go to high frequency, that more than 5 nanometer, which then sorry, not 5 micrometer, then you can get the high frequency IR just corresponding to water vapor. But in the mid range, in the mid IR range, typically it is coming from CO2, and if that is not present, IR can be very misleading. So therefore IR thermography can be misleading for the flame temperature measurement. Similarly, same is the IR absorption. However, these methods, Rayleigh, Raman and PLIF, both are very good for this measurement. Rayleigh and Raman are direct measurement. PLIF actually does not give the temperature directly. You get the species and then calibrate it back for the temperature field. So, and then soot and particles, you use LII or Mie scattering or pyrometry. Exhaust gas, you can use Raman spectroscopy, IR imaging, IR absorption, etc. So you can see that out of this various things that we need to know for a combustion system, at least 3, the mixture preparation, the flame radicals and the flame temperature, essentially requires this system PLIF, PLI, and that is why let us talk about what it is and how is it working and what it does. So there is a schematic taken from Dantex Dynamics site of a planar laser induced fluorescence system. What we have is an ND-YAG laser. This laser is not the primary laser. This provides high energy to operate this dye laser. This dye laser actually have different, you can fill it up with different dye gases. So you can change the gas also to get different frequencies, and then ND-YAG laser actually excites the dye laser, and a particular frequency laser beam is created, which is of course a sheet optics which goes through a flame front. Now, when it goes through this flame, there is a schematic here, there is a particular lambda is the frequency of this. When it goes through this flame, this gets slightly shifted because of fluorescence, and next slide I will come to why it happens. So, there is a slightly frequency shift, because what happens is that first of all this flame has lot of radicals and it absorbs part of this laser beam, gets excited, but excitation is more than it can handle, then it fluoresces and de-excites. So, therefore, when it comes down to a ground state, it emits some light, and that is the fluorescence. So, this is typically there is a rate shift, it will emit at a higher frequency than this, and using a partial filter. Now, for a given intensity or the frequency of this beam and the given radical we want to measure, there is a specific shift that we get. So, we know that at what frequency the fluorescence light is coming. So, we can use a spectral filter here and then take that image only, and then we put a camera. So, this entire species field can be obtained. Okay. So, that is the principle of it. This is the IF principle. So, what we have is a laser sending light at a particular frequency, gets shifted, another camera is looking at this, and then we can process. So, it is almost a direct measurement. And one thing is that you see there is a CCD camera, there is a component called image intensifier used here, because typically this intensity of this lights will be very, very small. So, you have to excite or intensify the image, that is why image intensifier is used, and again a very expensive system because of all these components, because the camera is a special camera, image intensifiers, intensified cameras are very expensive, these dye lasers are very expensive, and so this is what it is. Now, let us look at the physics of it. Here there is a diagram given here which is called Jablonski diagram. It shows essentially the excitement state of various molecules. Let us say the molecules are at this state S naught, initial ground state. Now, we put light into this ground state, then these are essentially the, after an electron absorbs a high energy photon, the light is a high energy photon, it comes and hits these electrons, it gets excited because of the absorption of this photon or light. So, it goes from here to this excited state S1. So, that is what absorption will do, but this state is unstable. So, it has to stabilize itself, and when it is stabilizing, it can have non-radiative transition here, and then from here to here you can go for a radiative fluorescence. So, when it de-excites from here to here, it can come down, it becomes stable here. So, it has started from here, it has gone up here, and then it has come down to this. These are different frequency states. So, let us say it is going from 0, it has gone to 2. So, a slightly higher frequency, but in process it has emitted this frequency light, and this is the light we are capturing. So, now this frequency we know, let us say we are trying to capture this. So, it is supposed to come here. So, this frequency we know, we can get the intensity of this and we can get the entire picture that where this species is present, which is getting excited and de-excited like this. So, this is what the principle of operation of a play phase, that the light is getting absorbed from this. So, let me go to the next set. So, this is what the fluorescence is. When an orbital electron or a molecule, atom or anything relaxes to its ground state by emitting a photon from an excited single state. So, this is the excitation state. S naught is initial, h nu, h is the Planck's constant, nu is the frequency, this is the excitation frequency, it is absorbing going to state S1. S1 as I mentioned is unstable. So, there is fluorescence that happens from S1, it is coming back to S naught, but it has emitted this frequency h nu em is the electromagnetic frequency, is the fluorescence, and plus some heat, but this heat is insignificant compared to the others. So, therefore, this can be neglected. So, this is what we are measuring. Okay. So, this is what is essentially the operating principle of a PLIF system. Now, this S1 can relax by various competing pathways. It can undergo a non-radiative relaxation in which the excitation is dissipated as heat, which is shown here, and also it can go through excitation through the fluorescence. Now, it can there is this phenomena, by the way, fluorescence is very common in biological species. For example, you heard of phosphorescence. phosphorescence is one of the phenomena of fluorescence where it goes into a triplet state. So, it is essentially a secondary non-radiative relaxation step, particularly shown in organic molecules. So, fluorescence is a very common phenomena in many organic molecules and particularly aquatic creatures. So, this is what it does. Now, this is based on this we can this system has been developed. So, here this is the S0 state, this laser beams come in, gets excited, the species gets excited, goes here and measured that at a particular frequency nu EM, this is measured, and then this entire flame at different location where this species exists which gets excited can be traced back. Okay. So, that is what it is. So, this is the working principle of LIF then. The laser wavelength is tuned to correspond to a energy transition within a molecular species of interest. So, you want to excite let us say CH, we have to send a particular frequency and then the excitation frequency will come at a certain frequency. So, there has to be some absorption of laser light and thus leading to excitation of state of molecules to a higher electronic energy state. Now, due to collision between the molecules in the gas, a redistribution of energy occurs immediately after the excitation, causing the de-excitation or the fluorescence. So, essentially when it returns to the lower energy state, a part of this excess energy which it has absorbed is released as photon, which is commonly known as fluorescence. Now, as a result of this energy distribution, typically we have a rate shift, it gets shifted towards the higher frequency which I have shown in the Jablonski diagram, it typically gets shifted to a longer wavelength. So, essentially what is happening is the frequency of the laser beam that is sending in and the frequency you are measuring are different frequencies, these are not same. So, therefore, it is very easy to distinguish also. You can put a specific special filter interference filter with the camera to look at only the excited frequency, not the incident frequency. So, therefore, the background noise can be very easily eliminated. Okay. And so, therefore, a spectral filter is pressed in front of the camera lens which allows only the fluorescence to reach the intensified camera. Okay. Now, where this is used, one of the thing I mentioned is mixing. So, here are some of the examples of where mixing is used. So, combustion devices require increased fuel efficiency and improved performance, and in order to achieve this we have to understand detailed knowledge of fuel preparation and mixing, because the best possible way we can mix, we get closest to premix, and premix both chemistry as well as physics is very well known and very easily modelable. Okay. So, if we can make it as close to premix as possible, we can predict what is going to happen with much better confidence. So, that is the idea. So, therefore, mixedness plays a very important role. So, we need to resolve liquid and gaseous fuel distribution inside the flow field or practical system, particularly in very harsh environments where the pressure and temperatures are very high, which makes the conventional methods completely useless, and we cannot stick in sensors there, and the processes are highly transient. The processes are highly transient as well as the transport phenomena are highly transient. So, the temporal resolution is also critical, it is not only spatial resolution, because of the transient nature of the processes we need to have temporal resolution as well. So, what are the things that mixing affects is the fuel distribution, mixture fraction, flow fields, all these things. So, here some of the PLIF results showing certain phenomena. This is kerosene PLIF. Essentially kerosene can be seeded with some other say acetone or something. So, the fuel when it comes in, it is seeded with acetone, and then acetone has its own PLIF characteristic. So, when we do a PLIF analysis of that, we can see where kerosene is located in the flow field. So, that tells us, because typically what we would like to have a uniform homogeneous distribution of fuel, okay. But if we are not, similarly you can do for diesel engines. So, diesel engines you can see where the spray is located and how it is spreading. So, for a particular spray combustion system, how the fuel is distributed in the flow field, that can be measured using this system. Here is a PLIF image being taken of a practical gas turbine combustor. Here is the cutout of a gas turbine combustor, and this is how it looks like, how the combustion is occurring. Here you can see the fuel vapor PLIF. Okay. So, this is the fuel vapor coming in, and you can see the concentration, it is located, is coming from a swirl combustor, a swirl atomizer. So, you can see that it is primarily located here. So, this measurement can be taken, this can be provided as initial condition for numerical analysis. So, you know exactly where the fuel vapor is located, you do not have to take a guess, make a guess, because typically if you make a guess it will not be correct and then your predictions will be completely off. Similarly, you can see where the maximum concentration of fuel vapor is and how it is spreading. This one is acetone PLIF. Now, here you can see that this is the spray flame, this is where acetone PLIF, where the fuel is located, this is OH PLIF where the flame is located. So, this image you can see that this is where the fuel is, this side is oxidizer. So, it is a diffusion flame typically jet diffusion flame. So, this is where the acetone means is a fuel, this is the boundary of the fuel and oxidizer where the flame is located. So, this features and also the detailed features of the flame can also be obtained, okay, and where there are wrinkling, where there is stretching, everything can be seen from this measurements. Next, let us look at reaction chemistry. Now, reaction chemistry essentially means the looking at the species, different species that are formed. So, location of initial flame kernel and the precursor species is very important for understanding the combustion process and ignition, and particularly for modeling effort, this is one of the parameters you need to measure or rather need to satisfy in order to sustain the flame in your numerical framework. Then what we need is species selective detection. Okay. We have to identify particular species and we can identify this particular species and then see where this species is located in the entire flow field. So, the chemistry can be validated, okay, because typically what we do in chemical kinetics, we propose a kinetic reaction mechanism and based on that we do the calculations. Then we have to see based on our calculations what we are predicting, is it matching with the experimental data or not. So, this can give us an entire field where a particular location of particular species concentration will be. So, the chemistry can also be validated, the proposed chemistry can be validated. Now, what are the things that we are similarly we can identify the hot spots and the reaction zones where we have more reactions occurring, and also characterization of flame structure can be done by looking at species. So, here there are some of the species given here. For example, this is NO PLIF. This shows in a particular flame zone what are the location where more NOx is being created. NOx is typically created in flame zone. If you can modify that, it will not be created beyond that and rather it gets absorbed beyond that. So, if you can modify those zones where more NOx is created, you can actually reduce NOx formation. So, you can modify the combustion process by knowing where more NOx is created and you can maybe put air streams going into that to reduce the NOx. So, knowing the distribution of NOx in the flow field helps in reducing the NOx. Similarly, this is the CH PLIF, this is CH and H2CO. So, you can see the two different species are simultaneously measured. That is again I was talking about, because these two will be getting excited at different frequencies. So, they can be simultaneously measured by sending two different laser signals, laser lights, but this is a single frequency, these are two different frequencies. Similarly, CN and H2CO are measured simultaneously. Here this is CHO and OH. This one here is again at high speed PLIF, the OH concentration at different time instances are taken. So, you can see that how the flame is progressing, how the flame kernels are developing, how the structure is developing, everything can be seen. So, better understanding both in the spatial evolution as well as temporal evolution of the flame can be obtained. At present, the PLIF systems can go up to as high as 10 kilohertz. Of course, the lasers has to be pulse laser and that repetition rate has to be there, and when we go to higher and higher speed, the image intensifier also gets more and more expensive. So, it is the question of cost, nothing else. And if you are going for multiple species, you need to have multiple lasers, single laser will not do, because each of them are essentially sending a particular laser pulse, because one dye laser at one time can give only one frequency, it cannot give multiple frequency. So, multiple lasers has to be used to get, but it is again, since all these species operate at different frequencies. So, technically we can have 10 laser sources and 10 species can be simultaneously measured without interfering with each other. Okay, that is the advantage of this system. Yeah. PLIF I do not need tensor particle. Acetone PLIF, okay. Acetone PLIF is typically to study mixing. So, acetone we say that it mixes with the gas, it is following the gas path, because air have nothing to fluoresce, right, you will not be able to excite air, but acetone gets excited. Similarly, water you cannot excite, acetone get excited, so vapor get excited. So, you are tracing acetone to represent, is the surrogate of the main flow. Okay. Now, this is the flame temperature. Flame temperature measurement is not direct, you have to calibrate of the species field to temperature field. So, this is OH and temperature fields at different times. So, this is a tunable ND arc laser was used for UV Rayleigh thermography, and then OH PLIF imaging was done, and then these two can be compared together to get the temperature field. This is a more difficult process. Typically calibration of PLIF systems, PLIF typically gives what you call is a qualitative picture, because calibration of PLIF is very expensive. It is possible, people have tried that to get quantitative numbers, but qualitatively this is very good. Quantitatively to get those numbers you have to match with, either you can take let us say the measurement like this, or you can take point measurement of temperature using a field and then correlate it, project it back. Those are possible, but it is more time consuming and expensive. Whereas, so qualitatively it is a very good thing, it gives the understanding of the physics. So, you can make modification based on that information. Now, this is one thing I was talking about, PLIF versus chemiluminescence. Chemiluminescence is also a phenomena where it is directly excites, the radicals get excited and it gives the basically the excited frequency is given out, and we can directly measure those excited frequencies. So, here the LIF image shows a snapshot of a thick slice of flame, whereas when I look at chemiluminescence it is not a slide, it is the overall 3D average. Okay, so this entire 3D thing is there. Here PLIF is a snapshot, then we can remove the laser a little bit and get different cuts of the flame, but here this is completely spatial average. So, that is something that cannot be distinguished. So, that is one of the disadvantages of chemiluminescence. Another thing is that the chemiluminescence technique requires much longer exposure time, because in order to collect enough light and therefore, during that time the turbulence flow structure change. These are 3 snapshots. See, this has a different structure, the same flame, when you are increasing the time you see a different structure, and one we go to this one I will say is a very good chemiluminescence picture, has nice distinguishable feature, but this turbulence features are no longer there, because it is averaged over a long period of time. So, here now that is one of the disadvantages of chemiluminescence, that we lose information because in order to get more light, whereas PLIF will give us the turbulence structures very well, because it is a much faster. So, that is major advantage. And then another thing is that if you look at this OH PLIF and OH chemiluminescence, you see that in this zone peak is the same, but away from the peak in this zone you have quite a bit of OH present. This is the diffusion of OH that you are seeing here, but that is not seen in chemiluminescence, because it is not a sharp edge, flame will not be a sharp edge, there is a diffusion zone, but in the chemiluminescence the intensity difference is so much that this cannot be distinguished. Okay? And if you have to distinguish it, you have to give more time to get that amount of light, whereas PLIF at reasonable time gives. So, therefore, this feature away from the flame PLIF gets is much better, because PLIF does not require the flame to be present, let me put it this way, PLIF does not require the flame to be present to do the study, whereas chemiluminescence requires the flame to be present, because it is directly coming from the flame. So, it will take measurement only in the flame, not away from it, not up and down, and that is the. So, you can see the distinction this difference, this is the PLIF OH distribution, this is the chemiluminescence, this is much narrower, this is much wider, and because of that the entire diffusion flame zone is much better to use PLIF to study it. However, for certain cases, just to get a broad idea of what is happening, chemiluminescence is much cheaper and gives reasonably good information regarding the peaks and locations of the flame. right. So, if we have to go for more detailed measurement, PLIF is preferable, otherwise chemilumination does a decent job. This is another thing, as I mentioned, LIF can be combined with other measurement. So, it is a combined LIF, PIV and LDV measurements in a flame. So, you can see there, this is the velocity vector, these edges are obtained using the LDV and then the flame images, everything is there. So, measurement were carried out with LDV, PIV and for velocity field mapping and simultaneous PIV and LIF of OH radicals. So, how the radicals field change with the flame can also be seen. So, like I was mentioning, PIV and LIF can be done simultaneously. So, the direct impact of velocity field on flame and effect of flame on velocity field, both of them can be studied simultaneously. That is a major advantage. So, this is taken from this paper and essentially it shows the interaction of flame front with large scale flow motion. So, that is something that again the experimentation is quite expensive and but it gives lot of information, and they have also compared with LES predictions and showed that it works very well. Now, so advantages of PLIF then is a non-intrusive nature. So, you do not have to put a probe. So, therefore, there is no change in the local field, unlike the other methods where you have to put a thermocouple or a suction probe which will locally change the flow field. This is an in situ multi-parameter reacting flow measurement even in the harsh environment of practical combustion systems. So, first of all it is direct measurement and multi-parameter. It is not a single parameter is measuring, multiple parameters can be measured together, contribute significantly to the reduction of combustion generated pollution. If we know the system properly, we can design the system in such a way that this species can be reduced. Okay, so, essentially the advent of this system has led to development of certain systems which have contributed substantially to the development of newer combustion system for reduction of gases. Unlike other flow imaging technique, PLIF may be combined with PIV. This allows simultaneous measurement of field velocity field and species concentration, which is a big advantage. Simultaneously taking local measurement and spatial measurement of species and velocity field can show various things which we will be studying in this course: turbulence chemistry interaction, flow chemistry interaction, the flow field, how it emerges, how the temperature affects, everything can be done through this combined measurement. So, whatever you are studying in the course can be seen in this measurement. Limitations: flow field must have the molecular species. You need something to get excited. So, very few molecular species for radicals get excited, but stable materials will stable molecules will not get excited. That is why acetone is required to make it excited, and temperature requirement typically require 2 laser sources, so that you have to make some corrections. Velocity measurement typically practical only for high Mach number flows, but it is doable. It is not that it is not doable. Signal to noise ratio often limited by detector short noise. It interferes with other species, especially from hydrocarbon in high pressure reacting flows. Now, this is something that is critical, that typically if you are going for CH PLIF, it interacts with CH radicals. If you are trying to excite CH PLIF, here it interacts with the radical, particularly it is a low pressure system, it is not that critical, but when you go to high pressure system, then it affects the chemistry. So, laser is giving additional excitation to the chemistry, and so that is what in the high pressure system is a problem. And attenuation of laser sheet across flow field or reabsorption of fluorescence before it reaches the detection. So, when the laser is going through the flow field, continuously it is seeing the medium, the laser intensity gets changed. So, before it goes to a detector, there may be some changes. So, again works very well in open flames. When you go to inside a particular system, it becomes more difficult, because accessibility becomes a problem, and that is true for every other system, whether it is LDV or PDPA or PIV or PLIF. If you are doing it in open system, it is very good. When you have to go inside, it is very, very difficult, because there will be scattering from the windows, you will not get, there will be basically refraction from the windows, it is difficult to focus. But with proper care, once everything is aligned, in a short duration of time, the kind of information that you can generate will be huge. Okay. So, with that I think, yeah, that is the end of it. So, thank you very much. Any question? Yeah. No, see the thing is that the tracer, particularly for mixing, it has to have the fluorescence capability. At the same time, the fluorescence should not come in a particular frequency which is close to a frequency of the radical. Okay. Then there will be resonance of that radical, and there is a, it may affect the chemistry, and it should be properly miscible with the fuel. Okay. So, for example, acetone will not mix with diesel. Acetone mixes with water or air, but it will not mix with diesel. So, that is something that depends on the what fuel you are using, and the tracer should be mixed to that. And of course, the fluorescence characteristics should be known, so that you can excite it. You know the what frequency will excite it and what will be the frequency of fluorescence. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Then you go for Raman spectroscopy. Okay. That is one instrument, Raman coherent and Raman spectroscopy, that will give you direct measure of all the species. Yeah. Yeah. So the exactly. So that is why, see, the thing is that the disadvantage. Now the systems are coming where you have continuously tunable laser. Here PLIF is basically is a tunable but specific frequency tunable laser. If you use a continuously tunable laser, then you can get a much wider spectrum. So many more species can be obtained, which Raman spectroscopy does. Okay. So because it is for a specific purposes where you are looking at basically location of frame kernel or where the reaction is occurring. So therefore you have actually your interest is focused to particular species, you want to look at them only. You are not interested in find out what are the species produced in the system. Okay. So that is why it is essentially like filtering technique, you can say. You filter out all other information, you focus on what you want to see. Okay. Anybody else? It is the photo detectors or the cameras, they have their own noise. So when it is taking a particular picture, there will be a noise superimposed on that. So that is what it is. So for example, photodiodes are less noisy compared to photomultiplier tubes. Similar, inherent noise. So CCD is more much better than CMOS. So and similarly, we have more CCD arrays, the noise signal to noise ratio will be higher. So essentially, the cost of the equipment depends on how much signal to noise ratio you get, that is how much short noise is there. Yeah.
So it's true that the OH which is measured using chemiluminescence is not the same OH as the OH you get from PLIF?
Well, they are a very similar frequency, not exactly. One is 306, one is 310. So this is within the same band, I would say.
Yeah, but one is OH star, the other
Yeah.
one is the OH. So for us, when you do the computation,
Yeah.
the question is to know if this OH that you measure is actually in our chemical scheme or not. I think when you do PLIF, you need additional
Yeah.
information, or maybe chemiluminescence. One of the two requires additional chemical.
No, that is PLIF. Chemiluminescence gives direct OH.
Okay, so that's the other one.
PLIF, yeah.
PLIF requires us
Yeah.
to add.
Yeah, there are two species, two different OH species.
That we need to add in our scheme.
Yeah. But the thing is that what is done typically that these two species of the luminescence frequency are almost similar. So what the companies do that they give a wider band pass filter. So both of them are averaged together.
But if you want to do quantitative
Then it is difficult.
simulations, we need
Yes,
to examine
absolutely,
species.
absolutely, absolutely. Yeah. Actually, this is something that the PLIF system we got. This is the problem we are facing. They gave us such a wide range of that OH filter that is very difficult to distinguish.
And how quantitative is it? When you say OH, can you say in ppm how much you have, and you know the precision of that?
Well, this is the again that I was mentioning that calibration of PLIF is still an issue. So it is mostly qualitative. Quantitative people are trying actually at a discussion with various companies. There people are trying, but since there is no other direct method apart from chemiluminescence, and chemiluminescence also is qualitative. So, unless you put a probe and take a sample and measure, you cannot get a calibration, because this gives the image and the intensity of the image. So, calibration is the issue.
You could compare with the simulation.
Yes,
Even under the flame.
yeah, that is true. That is true, but then the simulation, the test case has to be perfectly validated with other measurements. Yeah, so that is something, but this is one of the issues with all these companies, Dantec or Lavigen, everybody, calibration is the issue. Temperature calibration they are still able to do, because what they do is they put a screen and directly take the measurement using the IR camera, they take the temperature field, or they can have a thermocouple screen, and that they can directly use. But species calibration is very, very difficult. But it can be coupled with cars, that can give the species concentration, but that adds 3 times to the cost. No, again this is something that every species, that is why you have to a priori know which species you are trying to target, and you put a particular, see this is a dye laser, right. What is done is that in the dye laser you fill in with certain gas, then the ND-YAG laser excites it, it lasers at a particular frequency, and that frequency get absorbed and then fluorescence at a particular frequency which excites a particular species. So, you have to know what you are looking for. OH, again what he was asking, OH have 2 states which are equally likely very close to each other. Okay, so, they are essentially say 5-6 nanometer different 2 OH peaks, that is what creates the problem.